Hello everyone, this is John Steffen, and what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going over basic surfaces in 3D Studio Max, focusing on color, shininess, and texture and roughness. So to begin our process, I've already made a little scene in 3D Studio Max, and we're going to focus our efforts on this little sphere over here. Now to get the ball rolling, in the sense, alright, bad joke, is we need to go into the material editor, which can be found over here. Now you can select the button, or alternatively you can hit the M button as a shortcut key. Alright, third time's the charm there. And what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be basically putting on what's called a material on our object. And what a material is it basically has, and we're going to bring this over here so you can see it, all the visual information that's going to be on the surface on our 3D object. So elements like color, shininess, glossiness, bump, reflection, and all the other fun stuff, all that information is going to be stored on this material. So to actually click and drag this material on our object, you're going to click and drag this little icon over here and put it to the object of choice. No problem so far. Now, to actually put on something like a texture that we could find or create ourselves using Photoshop, we need to basically find an option called diffuse. This is basically the area where we put on color. Now you can change it just by selecting the little icon over here and change it to whatever you want, like so. Or alternatively, as stated before, you could go into where it says diffuse and basically select this little square, this darker square, and this will allow us to get on our options for all the different texture maps that we can put on. Now, if we want something more customable, we need to choose the option, which is actually at the very top, bitmap. So I'm going to click that, hit OK. And since I have some bitmaps already stored here, I basically want something that could have a lot of interesting detail and change. So I think that the rusty paint that I have here will work well. Okay. Now, if for some reason you lose your material, one thing that you can do to bring it back is select this little eyedropper over here, and you should be able to select your object almost immediately. And if not, oh, that's why we couldn't see it. It's right down there. Okay, but usually if for some reason this was gone and we need to bring that back, we can use the eyedropper tool to bring it back like so. Anyway, so right now we put the little picture that we have over here, and you can make that bigger by clicking the picture. And also you can look at the surface of the material by double-clicking the little picture over here. And you can see basically what it looks like, and other details such as tiling and the angle and other options can all be found right over here in this bitmap settings. As well as, if you want to, you can change the actual picture by clicking this little option over here and change to whatever other pictures might be in the directory you're currently working in. Now, in this case, I basically want to stay where I am, so I'm just going to cancel that. And yeah, there we go. And I want to put this material on my object. Now, it's already there, and the way that I can tell is these little triangles on the sides. Now, what those basically represent is if the material is currently being used. If you see these triangles, then that's a good thing. It means that they're being used in something. And if you select an object and those triangles highlight, it basically means whatever you have selected, that's what that material's on. Now, we can't really see basically how the material and texture are working, but if you want to get a little preview, there's a little option at the top over here. It looks like a little checkerboard with a light bulb in front of it. If you click this, you'll basically see a little preview of your mesh with the texture on it. And if you want to see what it really will look like once it's actually in the render, there's a little option up here. It looks like a teapot. It's called Render Production. You click that, and there's your preview. Pretty nice and simple. Now, what we're going to be doing next is we're going to be adding other details, such as shininess and gloss. Now, depending on what's called shader you have, and the shader basically calculates how the shininess is going to be put in, and a couple other little options. We can get into some more complicated elements of the shader a little bit later, but let's take a look at this. With the specular highlights, it's basically where we're going to focus on right now. If you change the specular level to a higher number, you'll notice that the object of choice now is a little bit shinier than what we had before. And the higher this number is, the more shinier it's going to be. Of course, you have to be a little bit careful because it can overdo the job a little bit. Now, another little option that could be useful for you is the glossiness. Now, basically what this entails is how focused the shininess is going to be. So if I put this at 0, the shininess is going to be focused all over your mesh equally. But if you basically make this a bigger number, it makes the shininess a little bit more focused. So it all depends on exactly what you need. But just a little heads up, what we have here for the shininess is kind of an all-purpose shine. So if I was to render this out, while it does look more visually interesting than what we had before, it looks a little bit too unified. It basically just looks like the same shade all over. And, well, if this is something that's a little bit rusty, that's not going to really be that convincing, because anything that's like right around here, if we take a little render, now you figure that something that's rusty wouldn't be shiny at all unless it was wet. And even then, it could look kind of nasty. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add some customable shininess, basically focusing on areas that would be painted being very shiny and areas that have rust to not be too shiny, shiny at all. Now, how can we control this? Well, what we can do, and I'm just going to put these both to 0 for now, is we can create what's called a grayscale map. Now, what the grayscale map will do, or value map as some people know it, is it's basically taking the color that we have here from our original map, making it black and white, and basically how that's going to work in terms of telling the surface what to do. Anything that's lighter is going to have a higher change. Anything that's darker is going to have a less change. Anything that's pure white will have the maximum amount of change, while anything that's pure black will have no change whatsoever. Now, to actually get the ball rolling, once again, you basically have to make this a black and white image. That's the easiest way to get started. So, if you guys go to Image, Adjustments, and I found that you could make this black and white. That's probably the fastest way to do that. And hit OK. So now if I put this directly onto my mesh, the shininess of it will change dramatically. So I'm just going to save this, and I'm going to keep it as a JPEG for now, though if you're going to do some serious texturing, you're probably going to have a different format. So we'll call this Rust, and we'll call this Specular, and save. It's always good to make sure you label all your stuff. And I'm going to put this at the highest value for now. Again, when you guys are going to be doing serious textures, you might want to use a texture file with a little bit better quality to it, something like TIFF, even a PSD file. But anyways, let's go back here. So currently, if I turn up the specularity as is, that's how it's going to look. It's going to be a little bit too unified. But let's put on that grayscale map we just created. So, yep, there we are. Now to put on the actual map itself, you go to the specular level, click that little box that's over here. Alternatively, if you don't want to have to keep clicking the boxes, you could also go into this area called Maps. Should look very familiar. And you can click and drag this to the area that you want to change. In this case, the specular level. And, yep, Rust Specular. And even here, you should see a pretty big change happen already. So let's take a look at our original. Now, if you guys want to compare surfaces, you guys could go to the rendered frame window. Let's see, I might have to, let's see here. Might have to minimize that. Let's see if we can see that. All right. Well, anyways, let's take a look at this before. You can just re-render it. It doesn't take too long. Okay, so this is the before. And I'll make it a little copy very quick. Now this, once we put on the specular level, is the after. So pretty substantial change that you guys could see already. So the version that you see to the right, it has the proper specular map to it. And we have full control using the value maps on basically what is going to be shiny and what is not. So, a little refresher, whatever is white is going to have a change, and the whiter it is, the more change it's going to have. Anything that's darker is going to have less of a change. The darker it is, the less of an effect it's going to have. Pure white is total effect. Pure dark is no effect whatsoever. So, important elements to remember. Now, in terms of what we're going to be doing next, because I do want to actually make a map specifically for the gloss, basically how focused the gloss is going to be, shininess is going to be. So, in theory, if I really wanted to, I could actually just use the specular level that I have previously, but I don't really feel like using that. Instead, I'm just going to add a minor change to this, because in this case, I don't think that the shininess is going to be very focused. So I think it's going to be in my best interest to turn down the brightness, using the brightness and contrast over here, and maybe turn up the contrast. Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to save this as gloss. So just going to want to change this. Oop. And yep, there we go. I'm going to call this rust_gloss. I cannot stress how important it is to name all your elements. It does make the whole process a lot easier, particularly when you have a scene that has a lot of textures to it. Your folder can start to have tens, possibly hundreds of different pictures for a simple scene. So, rust gloss, very good. Highest quality, and I'm going back and I'm making myself a new bitmap. There we are. And rust gloss. So again, I didn't want it to be too focused. Yeah, there we go. Let's actually take a closer look at this render so you guys can really see the difference. There we are. So it definitely looks much more interesting compared to what we had previously. But even though we've done a lot with the surfaces, we're not quite done yet. We still have one element that can really make this look sharp, and that is bump. Now, as it probably sounds, logically from the name, basically it gives our surface more of a texture feel to it, or basically more of a rougher feel to it. And something that's kind of nice about the bump map is it's an element that you can add more detail that basically makes it look like it has more to it without adding a single polygon. So it's kind of lying in a way, but it does add some really nice detail and at a very small cost to your rendering. So let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to undo the brightness and contrast that I had here previously. Awesome. And what I'm going to do in this case is I don't want this, the lighter area, change too much, but I want the area that's darker as if it was like bubbly rust. Now the easiest way to do that is invert, which you can do by going to Image, and let's see, Adjustments, and invert. Now you could also do that by hitting Control-I, but I think this looks pretty good. And ooh, man, the areas where the rust is going to be so bubbly. So let's just take a look at this before and after. So this is where the rust is, and that's the area, because it's lighter, that's going to be pushed out more. And I'm going to go to File, Save As. And once again, just make this as a JPEG. Again, if you're going to be doing this for a serious project, you might want to use a different format, but for our purposes and for speed, that's why we're keeping it a JPEG. I'm going to name this Rust Bump, and hit Save. And hit OK. So, now that I have that ready, I'm going to once again go into my different options. Now I'm going to do this a little bit differently than I did before because the bump option isn't shown right away. The best way for us to get into this is to go to Maps, and this is basically all the other maps that we have available for us. In this case, the bump is right over here, and just a little heads up that the amount, which you can actually change on all of these, is currently set to 30%. So if you guys want the highest quality to this, or the most that's going to happen, you might want to put this at 100, although it can go beyond 100. But anyways, so I have my bump, choosing bitmap, and I'm choosing the rust bump. And there it is. And here is how it looks so far. So at this point, it's a little on the subtle side. Ooh, still looks good though. And definitely a much different than what we had before. But at the same time, it's still 30%. So let's make a copy of this. Ooh, a clone. Yep. And I'm basically selecting the clone rendered frame window so that I can compare. Really good method to get into if you ever want to compare and contrast. So once again, it almost looks like two little paper dolls. Awesome. And I'm going to go to the bump feature over here, and I'm going to change this to 100 so you guys can truly see the difference. So 30%, 100%. So there's definitely more of a bubbly effect, and does look kind of nasty. I definitely have to say, when it comes to 3D surfaces, although perfection and something that's looks clean can be nice, if you can make something that's like this, like Rust, look beautiful, I think you've truly succeeded as a texture artist. But anyways, and if you think that it's a little too much, you could always either turn it down in Photoshop, or alternatively, you can do some testing in here. So let's say that maybe that's a little too much bumpiness. You could change it to 75% in the bump, give it a render. Ah, perfect. I really like what I'm getting here. So, and that's pretty much it for all of it. Now, one other thing that you could do, if you really want to see the differences between all the different maps, you can solo the textures by themselves. So let's actually take a look at this material without all the bells and whistles. So this is what's called the diffuse map right here. Basically just the surface without any color or specularity. Now I'm going to turn on the specularity and gloss at the same time. There we go. But I'm going to turn off the the diffuse color, just so we can see the difference between the two. Yeah. So this is basically how the shininess is currently going to be working. So once again, there we are. So there's the diffuse color, and this is the specularity and gloss. And finally, I'm going to solo the bump so we can see that. And there we are. So we're making a quick little clone, give it a render, and that's how the bump looks without all the color or the specularity and shininess to it. So it's always good to, again, really get an idea of what you're adding on before you have the final version. Now, also something to kind of keep in mind is I do have lights in the scene. So if I bring this back a little bit, you can see that light. Now, in theory, you really don't need the light to be there to see some of this stuff in terms of the bump, but it does help a lot with the specularity. There we are. And if you want to get the best out of any surface, it's always best to have some kind of controlled lighting so you can really see what you're doing surface-wise. Now there's some other options that you can get into to basically make this look even better. Things like specular color, how the color of the shininess is going to be. Opacity, if there are elements you want to make more transparent. Reflection and refraction, if the surface requires it. But we'll leave that for another tutorial at a future date. But this is pretty much the main things I wanted to show today, and for some of you guys review. And what I'm going to be showing in the future is I want to show you guys how to take a tileable texture, which is a texture that can be repeated over and over and over again, and how you can actually add detail to it. So once again, this is John Steffen, and thank you for watching.